1st century, Nero. Nero became emperor at just 16, and early on Rome hoped for stability. That illusion didn't last. As Nero grew obsessed with art and performance, governance took a back seat. He believed himself a musical genius and forced Rome's elite to attend hours-long performances, with guards reportedly preventing anyone from leaving, even if they collapsed or died inside the theater. Behind the spectacle was escalating violence. Nero ordered the execution of senators, political rivals, and eventually his own mother, Agrippina, after several failed assassination attempts involving poison, collapsing ceilings, and even a sabotaged boat. When Rome burned in 64 AD, Nero seized land cleared by the fire to build his massive palace, the Domus Aurea. To deflect blame, he targeted Christians, subjecting them to public torture, crucifixion, and execution by fire. Nero's reign turned imperial authority into personal survival. Law became irrelevant, fear became policy, and Rome learned that absolute power could rot from within. 2nd century, Septimius Severus. Septimius Severus rose to power through civil war, not legitimacy. After the assassination of Commodus, he marched on Rome with his army, executing rivals and purging the Senate. Once in power, he permanently altered Rome's political balance. Severus sidelined civilian governance and empowered the military, raising soldiers' pay and granting them legal privileges unheard of before. To fund this, he imposed heavy taxation and debased the currency, weakening the economy. His reign normalized the idea that emperors ruled by army loyalty alone. On his deathbed, he reportedly told his sons, "Be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and ignore everyone else." That single sentence defined Rome's future. Within decades, emperors were made and unmade by soldiers, coups became routine, and civil wars multiplied. Severus didn't destroy Rome immediately. He redesigned it into something unstable. His legacy wasn't chaos in his lifetime, but systemic collapse afterward. 3rd century, Maximinus Thrax. Maximinus Thrax was the first emperor who had never been a senator, a former peasant turned soldier who ruled through raw force. He deeply distrusted Rome's elite and launched widespread purges against senators and officials, often based on suspicion alone. Property was confiscated, executions were public, and loyalty was enforced through terror. To sustain constant military campaigns, Maximinus imposed extreme taxation. Entire communities were stripped of food reserves, livestock, and even temple treasures. These policies triggered famine, revolts, and economic breakdown. He never even entered Rome during his reign, ruling instead from distant military camps. His leadership accelerated the crisis of the 3rd century, a period marked by civil war, inflation, invasions, and near-total imperial collapse. Maximinus didn't just rule brutally, he ruled without a state, turning Rome into a permanent battlefield. 4th century, Constantius II. Constantius II inherited an empire already strained, and ruled it through paranoia. His reign was defined by endless purges. Governors, generals, and even close relatives were executed on accusations of disloyalty or heresy. No one was secure, and competence became dangerous. Religious repression intensified under Constantius. He aggressively enforced his version of Christianity, exiling bishops, imprisoning dissenters, and dismantling pagan institutions. This wasn't about faith. It was about control. Fear replaced trust within the imperial system. Military leadership suffered as capable commanders were removed out of suspicion. While the empire remained intact, it functioned under constant tension. Constantius shows how repression doesn't need spectacle. Sustained fear can quietly dismantle an empire. 5th century, Theodosius II. Theodosius II ruled for over 40 years, yet his reign is remembered less for action than for inertia. His court focused obsessively on religious legislation, issuing laws regulating belief while borders weakened and military readiness declined. Invasions were met with delay, bribery, or avoidance rather than reform. Corruption flourished within the bureaucracy, and decision-making became slow and fragmented. While the Eastern Roman Empire survived, it did so rigid and brittle. Problems were postponed, not solved. Theodosius wasn't cruel like others on this list, but his failure to adapt left lasting damage. Sometimes history's worst leaders aren't tyrants. They're administrators who govern theology while the world burns. 6th century, Khosrow Khosrow I is often praised as a brilliant ruler, and that's what makes his record unsettling. His wars against Byzantium were systematic and ruthless. Cities were destroyed, populations deported, and skilled workers forcibly relocated to serve imperial projects. Entire communities were uprooted as a matter of policy. Civilians were enslaved, infrastructure dismantled, and regions reshaped through calculated violence. His administration was efficient, his taxation precise, and his warfare devastating. Short-term stability came at the cost of long-term regional destruction. Khosrow proves that intelligence doesn't limit cruelty. It can optimize it. His reign reminds us that effective governance and mass suffering are not opposites. They can coexist. 7th century. Emperor Yang of Sui. Emperor Yang of Sui ruled China with grand ambition and catastrophic indifference. He launched massive construction projects, including the Grand Canal, using forced labor so brutal that millions are believed to have died from exhaustion, starvation, or exposure. Entire villages were emptied to serve state demands. Yang then pursued disastrous military campaigns against Korea, repeatedly losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers. To fund this, taxation intensified while famine spread. Revolts erupted across the empire, and repression only worsened them. Within years, the Sui dynasty collapsed entirely. Emperor Yang didn't just rule badly. He burned through human lives so recklessly that the state itself disintegrated under the weight of his ambition. 8th century. Lushan. Lushan was a Tang dynasty general who launched a massive rebellion in 755 after turning against the imperial court. His forces captured major cities, destroyed farmland, and triggered widespread famine. Contemporary records describe mass executions, starvation, and the collapse of civil administration across northern China. Census data shows the population fell by tens of millions during and after the conflict. Although Lushan was assassinated before the rebellion ended, the war continued for years, permanently weakening Tang authority and militarizing regional governance. 9th century. Emperor Xizong of Tang. Emperor Xizong ruled during escalating rebellion and famine, but repeatedly fled the capital instead of governing. Power shifted to court factions and regional warlords who extracted grain, labor, and soldiers from civilians. Infrastructure collapsed, roads became unsafe, and food shortages intensified. Religious persecution increased while basic administration failed. By the end of his reign, imperial control existed largely in name, with much of China fragmented into competing military zones and central authority unable to enforce law or protection. 10th century. Otto III. Otto III became Holy Roman Emperor as a teenager and ruled with an abstract vision of reviving the Roman Empire. He prioritized religious symbolism and court ritual over regional governance, alienating nobles in Germany and Italy. His interventions destabilized local power structures and provoked revolts. Administrative neglect weakened imperial authority, while unresolved conflicts spread across the empire. Otto spent much of his reign abroad, leaving regions without effective leadership and accelerating political fragmentation after his early death. 11th century. Pope Urban II. Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1095, framing armed violence as a religious obligation. His declaration triggered mass mobilization across Europe and pogroms against Jewish communities along Crusader routes. In the eastern Mediterranean, Crusader armies captured cities through siege, massacre, and forced conversion. Warfare was legitimized through spiritual reward, bypassing secular restraint. Urban's actions reshaped medieval conflict by linking salvation directly to organized, large-scale violence. 12th century. Emperor Huizong of Song. Emperor Huizong presided over cultural prosperity but neglected military defense and state security. Court resources were diverted to art, luxury, and ritual, while frontier threats intensified. When invasions began, the Song military proved ineffective and poorly prepared. Northern China fell, the capital was captured, and large sections of the population were killed or displaced. The state survived only after retreating south, with massive territorial loss and social disruption following imperial collapse. 13th century. Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan completed the conquest of the Song dynasty after decades of warfare that devastated southern China. Prolonged sieges destroyed cities and agricultural systems, while civilian casualties mounted. After establishing the Yuan dynasty, Kublai imposed heavy taxation and an ethnic hierarchy privileging Mongols over local populations. Resistance was suppressed by force, and revolts were met with mass punishment. Although administratively capable, his rule followed one of the most destructive conquests in East Asian history. 14th century, Ivan I of Moscow. Ivan I expanded Moscow's power by collaborating with Mongol rulers and enforcing tribute collection on rival Russian states. He used coercion, confiscation, and executions to suppress resistance and centralize authority. Wealth extracted from surrounding regions strengthened Moscow while weakening competitors. Political dissent was eliminated through repression rather than integration. His methods entrenched authoritarian rule and linked state formation to systematic violence and enforced loyalty. 15th century, Pope Alexander VI. Pope Alexander VI ruled through extreme nepotism and political manipulation. He placed family members in positions of power, sanctioned assassinations, and used church authority to wage wars in Italy. Papal resources were diverted for personal enrichment, while corruption became openly institutionalized. His reign involved bribery, intimidation, and military force rather than spiritual leadership. The credibility of the papacy deteriorated sharply as religious authority became indistinguishable from secular power struggles. 16th century, Philip II of Spain. Philip II ruled one of the largest empires in history through rigid centralization, religious repression, and prolonged warfare. His reign saw the expansion of the Spanish Inquisition, targeting Protestants, Jews, and Muslims through imprisonment, torture, and execution. Military campaigns in the Netherlands involved mass reprisals, civilian killings, and the destruction of towns. Heavy taxation to fund wars contributed to repeated state bankruptcies and economic strain. Political dissent was suppressed through surveillance and force, while imperial governance relied on coercion rather than reform. 17th century, Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb ruled the Mughal Empire through military expansion and religious repression. He reintroduced discriminatory taxes, destroyed or repurposed temples, and suppressed dissent through force. Prolonged wars in the Deccan consumed enormous resources and caused widespread civilian suffering. Agricultural regions were devastated, revenue systems strained, and rebellions intensified. Although the empire expanded territorially, internal stability weakened as military costs escalated and sectarian divisions deepened across the subcontinent. 18th century, Warren Hastings. Warren Hastings served as the first Governor-General of British India during a period of aggressive expansion by the East India Company. His administration prioritized revenue extraction through land taxes that intensified during famine conditions. In Bengal, millions died amid food shortages while tax demands continued. Judicial reforms centralized power but often favored company interests over local populations. Military campaigns and political interference destabilized regional states, embedding economic exploitation and administrative coercion into colonial governance. 19th century, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's presidency was marked by the forced removal of Native American nations from the southeastern United States. Under the Indian Removal Act, federal authority was used to override treaties and court rulings protecting indigenous land rights. Military enforcement and coerced agreements led to the displacement of tens of thousands of people. During removals such as the Trail of Tears, communities faced starvation, disease, and exposure, resulting in widespread death. Entire societies were uprooted to facilitate territorial expansion, while resistance was suppressed through legal pressure and armed force. 20th century, Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union through centralized authority, political repression, and mass violence. His policies included forced collectivization of agriculture, which led to widespread famine, particularly in Ukraine, resulting in millions of deaths. The Great Purge involved arrests, executions, and imprisonment of perceived political opponents, military officers, and civilians. Labor camps known as the Gulag system held millions under harsh conditions. State control relied on surveillance, censorship, and fear, while economic and political power was concentrated through coercive enforcement. 21st century, Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad has ruled Syria through authoritarian control and extensive use of military force. During the Syrian civil war, State forces carried out widespread bombardment of civilian areas, mass arrests, torture, and enforced disappearances. Chemical weapons were used in multiple documented attacks. Cities were besieged, infrastructure destroyed, and millions displaced internally or forced to flee abroad. Power has been maintained through security services, collective punishment, and suppression of political opposition, with civilian populations bearing the primary cost of prolonged conflict.